So now we will have to improvise a little bit because the next speaker lost his voice over the night. Yeah, but we are prepared for everything during the XML conference. So the next talk should be delivered by David Filip, but he cannot speak, or at least speak too much loud. But he had some colleagues and friends here, so the presentation will be delivered by Jan Husar and Sourosh Husarchik, and Sourosh Sadafar. So please come here and join us. I will give you some devices.
So I'm giving you 3 speakers in one. Sorry.
Does it work? Obviously.
I think
Yeah.
Okay, and you will learn something new about the current status of XLIFF, which is the localization standard and how it integrates with ITS. So we start.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. We have to say that the presentation was reassigned to Jan and myself just today after lunch. So we were supposed to have an easy day, but it didn't turn out like this. So David and myself are co-editors of XLIFF 2.1. And Jano is our industry partner, a stakeholder from Moravia, so he would start the presentation, and then I will come in the second part. Here you go.
Just present, you should use keyboard probably.
Okay.
No, it's just laying on the table.
Okay, so as Surush said, this was a bit unexpected for me, so I might not deliver the best performance. What's XLIFF? XLIFF is XML localization interchange file format and the only open standard Bitext format available. The previous version, 1.2, was a standard since 2008 and was replaced or superseded by the current version 2.0, which is not backward compatible with the previous version, but the reason for this is the modularity of the standard, which will allow all the following versions to be backward compatible with 2.0. The first public review, the first draft for public review was published last year. The public review was completed, and now the second one is open for your contribution. Since today, you can find it on OASIS pages. Well, I already talked about this. The main changes in the first release is the ITS module, and which we'll sort of talk about, and major bug fix of change tracking module. So this is the agenda, and what's Bitext? Bitext is basically aligned pairs of source and translated sentences, which in case of XLIFF is ordered by default, ordered as, for example, sentences in this slide. That's different compared to, for example, TMX or TBX standards, which are just unordered artifacts which serve for translation memory exchange and terminology exchange. This is a sample Bitext where you can see original text in English and the translation in Czech of the poem by William Blake, where this version is a tabular layout, usually presented to translators for easier navigation. In XML, you can start by aligning the text using the nodes depicting the source and translation, compared to, for example, PO, where the only thing are pairs of ID, which is also the original content, and the translation. Well, this is basically the final PO file. In XML, you can add additional metadata in forms of attribute, in this case, describing the original and translation target language. And by grouping the Bitext into segments and into units that, in this case, correspond to the paragraph from the poem. Stanza. So Bitext management is basically what I do as a localization service provider. It's a group of processes that manipulate these ordered or unordered Bitext artifacts. By manipulation, we mean the pre-processing, the translation, review of the translation, QA. In case of unordered Bitext, it's the translation memory and terminology management. This flowchart represents how XLIFF serves as a way of communication between various agents in the localization workflow, usually starting with XLIFF being extracted from the original format, where basically anything can be extracted to XLIFF, where recycling is applied, machine translation is applied, the actual translation is carried on, quality control is performed, and then is delivered back to the CMS or the customer. This is the most simple use case where both customer and localization service provider don't support Bitext. You can imagine a translator that gets his Word document in, for example, English, open another Word, and just types the translation into the second document. You cannot really automate this workflow. You cannot make use of all the features the localization industry offers. And we are getting to the other use case where the customer is aware of what localization can do for them, but outsources all the management, all the Bitext management to the LSP, where the extraction, the rest of the localization workflow, and the merging is done on the LSP side. And final example, the corporation has its own Bitext management system where extraction and merging is done, which is currently being quite common. And just the translation, editing, and quality control is left to the LSP. These are the various scenarios you can end up with standards. The ideal solution is when the standard is where the communication is based on open source and open standards. Then you are getting to various combination with the worst case scenario where the standard is proprietary and the source is closed. And you are basically dependent on the LSP without option to choose or change it as you want to. Again, on the open side, the process of the standard, of creation of the standard is transparent and is royalty-free, as is the case of XLIFF, where you can actually contribute to the standard via the mailing list. And on the other hand, the whole standard is proprietary, and you can end up paying for the implementation. The Bitext evolved from the RTF, it's called unclean RTF, where both the original content and the translation is stored using some extensions. Then there was the XML-based proprietary format. Maybe some of you know the TTX in Trados. In parallel, the PO gettext was created, but as we've seen, it's not usually enough to convey all the metadata needed for the localization workflow, where XLIFF 1.2, well, 1 comes into play, which evolved into current implementation. If you take away the X from the XLIFF, you get just the localization interchange file format. The committee is working on the object model that will allow for example, JSON serialization of this standard. And Surush.
Okay, so for the XLIFF standard defines agents because the XLIFF is supposed to be used in the life cycle of the whole localization process. So we have these sort of agents we have defined. We have different behavior and compliance regulations defined for all of them. So we have, like you can see, the whole process of work, the localization project coming. So you have the writer, which extracts and reads, modifies, and merges back to the original format where it was taken from. So that is the innermost block of XLIFF. So we have these inline codes that can appear in line with the text. So it's pretty much like the textbook, the docbook inline elements. So it's a lot of them, but most important things, you can see the recursivity of PC, which is for paired code. So if you want to replace HTML codes, you can have inline, all of these inline elements again here. And the same for markers, so you can have the different nodes linked to the span of the text. But the most interesting ones are the pair of SC and EC for start code and end code. These are implemented in XLIFF so they can replace the non-well-formed tags. So like in RTF, you can have the one tag open, the second tag open, and then the first tag closed. So you cannot have this behavior in XML. That's why we had to invent those two elements, so they through attributes they refer to each other, so you can have the span well formed in XML. The same thing is for SM and EM, so these are for markers, for nodes, and those SC and EC are for code. But as this paper is mostly about ITS, and it's so the standard is implemented within the core and several modules, and so ITS has been, it's for internationalization taxes, so it's, I will get into the ITS a bit later, so it's the the current status of XLIFF. So we see that we have a lot of modules here, but for the latest version that has been just released for the second public review today, we have ITS module added, and we have the change tracking module also reinvented, because we had the requirement from implementers from the industry that people need to be able to track more elements. And yeah, so these are the data categories that ITS defines. So you can have pretty much everything that you would need to mark up. You would need to have different metadata for enrichment of your content to be internationalized and then to be localized in the process. So you can see that they all perfectly map all the 19 data categories of ITS. They're being implemented in one or another way in XLIFF, and so you can see the kind of historical background of the, for terminology, you have the standard like TBX. You have TMX for memory, for translation memory exchanges, and it's like the Dublin core. So you can see these, probably these would be more familiar. So you can see that they have been all mapped into XLIFF and ITS, so they represent the data categories. And so ITS, the basic idea of ITS is to be easily injected into other vocabularies. It has been also adopted by HTML, so you can have your HTML files already enriched with ITS metadata. So if we look at this HTML file here, so this is the very basic, the most basic data category of ITS. So you kind of translate, which is actually implemented in HTML locally. So this one is easy. The next one, so you can see that ITS has rules that ITS translate no, so you can have the span of the text that you don't want to translate. You can also apply the rules globally. So if you put this at the start of your document, you're saying that I don't want to translate any code element inside the whole document. And by the way, here are XPath expressions, so you can access pretty much everything inside your file. And so how, for instance, this one, the translate data category is implemented in XLIFF, already been there because it's apparently a very important feature in localization. So we have our own translate attributes, so it can be applied to a whole unit, which is the biggest block of the stored text, or you can have it in segment as well. Yeah. No? Okay, sorry. So segments are supposed to be translated all the time. So if we look at the equivalent in HTML, it has been extracted into XLIFF as such. So you have the first unit that is going to be translatable text, and the second one is not going to be translated. And there is also another way, so you can actually completely ignore the non-translatable text and just not extract it because it's not going to be translated or localized anyway. Yeah, so you just take the translatable text. So if you want to look at the kind of classification of ITS data categories from the point of view of how and when in the localization project is they're being used. So the first one is on the extraction level. So you have the translate local filter, which you can filter some local. So if you're going for a certain country or local, you can just exclude that from your list. And when your text is mixed with other elements. But there are data categories that represent the localization behavior. So pretty much they're all straightforward. Their name suggests the functionality. But the interesting one here is the target pointer, the second one. So using that, you can actually map your original content to various translations. So you can have the multilingual the multilingual corpus of your data. It can be used to to create translation memories, to train machine translation engines, and anything else here? Well, the rest of them are pretty much straightforward. So, and then we have the next class is the subject matter data category. So you can again have your terminology, text analysis, or the domain of your content. So what there is this class is being produced during the project. So you have your machine translation confidence. You can have different sorts of rating, quality assisting, and also tracking the provenance of the whole project. So if we go to see how ITS and XLIFF, how ITS is being implemented in XLIFF now, so we know that we have already a lot of them inside XLIFF. So translates, you can store localization notes in the XLIFF. But we had some data categories that had to be implemented from the scratch. So these are the allowed characters and text analysis. So they were not represented in XLIFF at all. We have another bunch of data categories that have partial overlap, so they need to be mapped and be given the recommendations to be used properly for XLIFF. And we have some data categories that are not represented, but they are completely consumed during the process of extraction. So when we were working on integrating ITS into XLIFF 2 as a module, so we were first going with that namespace. So it is the OASIS namespace for XLIFF documents. So we were going to have the ITS module, but because ITS processors would not be able to track this namespace and the actual ITS information, so we had to actually use the original W3C namespace. But still, because we had that issue with not well-informed elements, so we had to actually have the ITSM also for two data categories, which are language information. This, as it was mentioned, is being Bitext all the time. So you can, if you want to add your third language or fourth language, you would need new attributes. So that's why we decided to use the ITSM and ITS namespaces as well. And yeah, so if you see the actual usage of SM and EM, as I mentioned earlier, so if an ITS processor would just point to this to these elements, what they get is not span of text, but is just empty, because that is standalone element. This is standalone element. It is kind of pseudo span. It's not the real span. So it's so it is the so this is one of the XLIFF specific features for overcoming this limitation of XML. And so we had the sorry, I didn't get this one. Yeah, so we don't have the ITS for the global pointer, so we had to do that as well. And yeah, so we, yeah, it's still sorry. It's again about the ITS processors, how they can actually access and manipulate the data which is already inside the file. So you can. Sorry, for this feature of the ITS, you can have the ITS processors can actually very easily implement it to not have empty elements of SM and EM, but actually get the span of text. So it can be very easily implemented and added to the existing ones. And you don't have to implement the entire XLIFF for that. You can just have this particular behavior. So we are having a release of the XLIFF 2.1 right now. It's going. So if you want to subscribe or to contribute into our work, if you work with XLIFF or ITS in any way, sorry? Yeah, sure. Please do contribute. We are having as Jano mentioned, we are having the AMOS group, which is for object models. So XLIFF was so successful, well received, and widely implemented. So we're working on an abstract model for, to have the logic of XLIFF as the container for localizable data. And we had a very interesting issue that Jan actually raised into our mailing group, and if you want to share your experience.
We had experience with extraction process that was using standalone tags to represent paired elements or non-empty elements from the original content. Imagine a HTML with bold tags, which are represented by standalone tags, PH, that have a completely different purpose in the XLIFF. So we raised an issue via mailing list and asked to provide additional clarification in the standard that will explicitly disallow this use of the PH element.
Thank you. So please, if you have any questions, David or myself would be happy.
So thank you guys. Thank you for helping Filip to say his voice. So are there any questions? Do you see some hand? Because yeah. Wait for another mic.
Hi, okay. You shortly showed this example of a unit with the ITS translate attribute set to no. And the example does contain the source. In the real world, would you expect to have a target element for non-translatable content as well? Or is, because source and target element in end effect would be the same thing, would that be represented anyway? Or on a more broader scope, should non-translatable segments appear in the actual file in the first place?
So that's the other option, how to extract it. It's pretty much the decision of the extractor merger tool. The corporations usually implement the extractor merger tools, and it's pretty much up to them. They own the extraction merge bracket, if you want, of the process. But you can't answer this once for all. It depends whether there is linguistic relationships between them, because if there is linguistic relationships, it's important to display it to the translator. And the target element, that's the first part of the question. The target element is optional. There is 0 or 1 target elements. So, but there is a state attribute that can be used on segments. And then if the segments are considered more advanced than initial, then the target must be there. So it doesn't matter that it's the same if the whole thing is non-translatable. There might be differences in normalization, whatever, or it might not be. It is important. Almost always, it's important to display it, and in some cases, it's also important to create a target even if it's not translated. I hope this. And yeah, there is a specialized element. We were not going into this right now. There is a sibling element to segment called ignorable, which is a special kind of segment that basically doesn't contain anything translatable. and also doesn't require a target because it just contains, some white spaces or control characters or whatever. And those control characters would be encoded using the CP, like in LDML.
The reason you want to put non-translatable text inside XLIFF is to provide context. For example, a translator is working on some text which references code examples. But he would like to see those code examples, for example, because of the variable names. So he correctly places them and uses them in the translation. And about the missing target, we actually raised an issue via the mailing list about how merger should proceed in case the target is missing.
So do we have more questions? Because I don't see anyone. Maybe yesterday you also had some presentation about how to utilize XLIFF in Oxygen. So maybe once the videos are ready from Oxygen users meeting, if you are interested to learn more about XLIFF, you can watch the video if you haven't been attending in person yesterday.
Yeah, well, thanks for Jirka to mention that there is an Oxygen framework for XLIFF, and basically you can validate XLIFF in Oxygen using that framework. And Suruj will actually put the latest advanced validation artifacts, the schematrons from 2.1 to this framework. So it will be very useful for actually playing with XLIFF 2.1 and 2.0. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you again. So now there will be coffee break, so we'll be able to enjoy coffee, and David will be enjoying Vincentka, the special Czech mineral water, especially created for healing your voice. So upstairs there will be coffee and tea and sponsorira, and downstairs there will be something for eating, and we will continue in like 30 or 40 minutes.